They thought he didn't belong. They mocked his background, his clothes, and even his silence. To them, he was invisible, a poor boy who should never dare dream of standing among scholars. But what they didn't know was that hidden inside him was a brilliance that could silence even the most powerful voice in the room. This is the story of how a janitor's son faced a proud professor, and turned humiliation into triumph. Before we dive deep into the story, kindly support us by clicking the subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you are viewing from. The lecture hall of Harrington University stood like a temple of intellect. Tall ceilings, golden chandeliers, rows of polished mahogany desks. At the front, Professor Aldridge, the man feared by students and admired by peers, held court. Aldridge was known for two things: his genius in mathematics, and his ruthless pride. He thrived on breaking down anyone who dared to challenge him. And in the back of the room, sat Elijah. A thin boy in worn trousers and a faded shirt, his shoes cracked from years of use. He wasn't enrolled at the university. His father mopped these very floors, and Elijah often helped him late into the night. But whenever lectures were in session, Elijah would slip inside, sitting quietly in the shadows, scribbling equations in a battered notebook. Numbers were his escape, his passion, his secret world. That day, Professor Aldridge wrote an equation across the massive chalkboard. A monstrous thing of symbols, exponents, and fractions that seemed impossible to tame. Gasps echoed through the hall. Students exchanged nervous glances. Professor Aldridge, whoever solves this will earn a place on my research team. But if you cannot, remember your place. The room fell silent. No hands rose. And then, Elijah's voice broke the stillness. Elijah gently said, "I'd like to try, sir." The hall erupted in laughter. A student asked mockingly, "Him, the janitor's kid?" Another student said, "Careful, he might clean the board instead of solving it." Aldridge's eyes narrowed. His pride was pricked, but also amused. Professor Aldridge coldly said, You don't even belong in this lecture hall. But fine, entertain us. Solve it, and I'll give you the job. Fail, and you'll prove exactly what I think, that some people are destined for the broom, not the board. Whispers and laughter filled the room. To the students, this wasn't about mathematics. It was about humiliation. Elijah walked slowly to the front. His notebook shook in his hands, but his eyes carried a fire even his torn clothes couldn't hide. He picked up the chalk. For a moment, his hand trembled. A wave of laughter rolled across the room. Aldridge smirked, arms folded, already convinced this would be a short-lived joke. But then, something changed. Elijah's strokes grew faster, more confident. Lines of logic unfolded with elegance. Fractions collapsed, roots aligned, impossible tangles untangled. His mind, sharp from countless nights of self-study, cut through the complexity like a blade through silk. The laughter died. The whispers turned into stunned silence. Even Aldridge's smirk began to fade. Minutes later, Elijah placed the chalk down. The board was filled with rows of brilliant calculation, ending with a simple, undeniable answer. Solved. For a moment, the hall was frozen. Then gasps filled the air. A student from the back seats amazed and exclaimed, He actually did it. Elijah turned, his voice calm but resolute. Elijah said, "With all due respect, sir, sometimes the greatest minds come from the most unexpected places." His words landed like thunder. Aldridge's face flushed crimson. For the first time in years, he had been outshone, by a boy he had mocked, dismissed, humiliated. The students erupted into applause. Some even stood, clapping with respect. Elijah had not just solved an equation, he had shattered an illusion, that brilliance belonged only to the privileged. But while the applause rang, something darker stirred. For Professor Aldridge, this was not just defeat. This was humiliation. And humiliation demands vengeance. That day, justice was served, not by wealth, not by authority, but by truth. Elijah walked out of that lecture hall with no diploma, no fine clothes, and no powerful name. But he carried something far greater, proof that dignity cannot be denied and brilliance cannot be buried. Because sometimes, life uses the overlooked to humble the proud. But Elijah's victory was only the beginning. Professor Aldridge was not a man to forget humiliation. Behind his forced smile, he was already plotting ways to crush the boy who had exposed him. And as Elijah stepped out of the lecture hall, the applause still ringing in his ears, shadows were gathering, whispering of challenges far greater than a single equation. Elijah thought his victory was the end of the story. He thought solving that impossible equation had finally earned him respect. But what he didn't know, was that in humiliating Professor Aldridge, he had awakened a prideful man's darkest weapon, vengeance. And when pride feels cornered, it doesn't fight fair. Inside his office, Professor Aldridge sat in silence. The applause still rang in his ears, not as music but as a curse. How could a janitor's son, a boy with no education, no pedigree, make him, Aldridge, look small before his own students? His fists clenched. His pride boiled. And so, he hatched a plan. If Elijah wanted to prove himself, Aldridge would give him the chance. But this time, the challenge would be designed to destroy him. The very next week, a notice was pinned outside the lecture hall: special examination. A single problem to be solved in front of the faculty. Winner earns a scholarship. It was bait, a golden opportunity no poor boy could refuse. And Elijah, burning with hope for a future he never thought possible, accepted immediately. The students whispered, "This time he'll fail. Aldridge will crush him." A student said, "Or maybe he'll surprise us again." The auditorium was packed. Professors lined the front row, students crowded every corner. And on the board, Aldridge wrote an equation that twisted logic itself. It wasn't just difficult, it was cruel. A problem with layers of traps designed to confuse, to humiliate. Elijah stepped forward, notebook in hand. His palms sweated. His heart raced. He could feel every eye piercing into him. And then, he began. At first, his chalk scratched confidently across the board. But halfway through, he paused. His brow furrowed. This wasn't like before. Something was wrong. The crowd sensed it. Whispers grew. Smirks appeared. Aldridge leaned back in his chair, satisfied. But Elijah did not give up. He closed his eyes, blocking out the murmurs, the laughter, the weight of doubt. He remembered the nights spent studying by candlelight, the lessons learned not from teachers but from persistence. He flipped to a clean section of the board, and started over. This time, his movements were slower, more deliberate. He unraveled the traps one by one, exposing the tricks Aldridge had hidden. Every false path became clear, every dead end revealed its secret. Minutes stretched into eternity. Sweat dripped from Elijah's forehead. The hall was silent now, not mocking, but spellbound. Finally, the last symbol was placed. The answer, correct, unshakable. Gasps erupted. A wave of applause thundered through the hall. Even the faculty members, who had doubted, now stood in awe. But Elijah didn't smile. He turned, looking directly at Professor Aldridge. His voice was calm, respectful, but unyielding. Elijah said firmly, "You set this test to make me fail, sir. But I didn't come here to prove you wrong. I came here to prove that knowledge belongs to everyone, not just the privileged." The word struck deeper than the chalk marks on the board. Aldridge's pride shattered, but his envy only grew. That day, Elijah's name spread beyond the university walls. To the poor students watching, he was hope. To the professors, he was a reminder that brilliance cannot be bound by status. And yet, to Aldridge, he was a threat. Because the higher Elijah rose, the deeper Aldridge's resentment grew. But Aldridge wasn't finished. That night, as the campus slept, Aldridge sat in his office, scribbling letters, making phone calls, reaching into the shadows of influence. If Elijah thought solving an equation was his greatest challenge, he was wrong. Because Aldridge was about to play a game where equations couldn't save him. And soon, Elijah would discover that the real test had only just begun. And so we must ask ourselves, why is the heart of man so desperately wicked? Why does the success of another often feel like a threat, instead of an inspiration?